The concept of the golden child isn't just a psychological trope or a convenient plot device for bad television. In my family, it was a religion, and my older brother, Julian, was its reigning deity. For as long as I can remember, the sun, the moon, and the stars revolved around him, while I existed merely as a satellite, caught in the distant, cold gravitational pull of my parents' conditional affection. Julian was the handsome, charismatic, loud, and chronically irresponsible firstborn son. I was the quiet, studious, fiercely independent daughter who learned early on that if I wanted anything in this life, I had to secure it myself. And yet, despite a lifetime of evidence proving otherwise, I foolishly believed that when it came to the most important day of my life, my parents would finally treat me as an equal. I was wrong, and that miscalculation almost cost me everything. But what they didn't realize was that the quiet girl they had ignored for 27 years had grown up to become a senior cybersecurity threat analyst with a very particular set of skills, a ruthless sense of justice, and absolutely nothing left to lose. To understand the magnitude of the betrayal, you have to understand the origin of the wedding fund. The $40,000 was not a gift, it was not an inheritance. It was my money, every single cent of it. When I was 16, I started working as a freelance coder, building websites for local businesses and eventually finding bounties for software vulnerabilities. Because I was a minor, the high-yield savings account I opened to hold these earnings had to be a custodial account, with my mother listed as the primary adult. Over the next decade, through college, through my early career, I deposited a portion of every paycheck into that account. I lived frugally. I drove a beat-up Honda Civic. I skipped vacations and expensive dinners. I watched the balance grow, penny by penny, dollar by dollar, until it hit exactly $40,000. It was my nest egg, my security blanket, and eventually, it became my designated wedding fund. When I turned 18, I should have transferred the funds to a completely independent account. That was my first, and arguably my greatest, mistake. But my father, a man whose pride was only eclipsed by his financial ineptitude, had insisted that leaving it in the family trust account under my mother's name provided better interest rates and tax shields. It was a lie, of course, but at 18, you still inherently trust your parents, even if that trust is unearned. I left the money where it was, monitoring it through a view-only login portal on the bank's archaic website. I saw the numbers sitting there, solid and secure, and I felt safe. Then came Mark. Mark is the kind of man who makes you realize why every other relationship in your life had to fail. He is kind, deeply empathetic, a high school history teacher who builds birdhouses on the weekends and looks at me like I am the only person in a crowded room. We got engaged on a rainy Tuesday evening in our tiny apartment, over takeout Thai food, and it was the most perfect moment of my life. Almost immediately, we started planning the wedding. We didn't want a massive, ostentatious affair, but we did want elegance. We found a stunning botanical garden with a glass conservatory that cost a small fortune to rent. We booked a farm-to-table catering service, an incredible local jazz band, and a photographer whose portfolio looked like cinematic art. Mark contributed his savings, and I proudly announced that I had the $40,000 to cover the rest. We budgeted down to the dollar, setting up a payment schedule for the deposits. The wedding was set for a crisp Saturday in late October. Everything was proceeding flawlessly. The save-the-dates had been mailed, the dress had been fitted, and the flowers had been chosen. And then, 3 months before the big day, the final vendor invoices arrived. The caterer needed $15,000. The venue needed $10,000. The florist, the band, the rentals, they all needed to be paid within the week. I called my mother on a Tuesday afternoon during my lunch break. I was sitting in the break room of my cybersecurity firm, sipping lukewarm coffee, completely oblivious to the fact that my world was about to shatter. "Hey, Mom," I said cheerfully when she picked up. "Just calling to let you know the final invoices are in. I'm going to need you to initiate the wire transfer from the custodial account to my primary checking today so I can pay the venue and the caterer by Friday." There was a silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't the normal distracted silence of my mother watching television. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind of silence that precedes a car crash. Mom, I asked, my heart rate ticking up a fraction. Did you hear me? I have the routing numbers ready. We need to talk, she finally said, her voice tight and defensive. Your father and I are coming over to your apartment tonight. Is Mark going to be there? Mark is coaching debate club tonight, I said, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Mom, what's going on? Is the bank giving you trouble with the transfer? I know sometimes they flag large amounts. Just be home at 7, she said and hung up. I didn't eat the rest of my lunch. I went back to my desk, my fingers hovering over my keyboard, staring blankly at the lines of Python code on my monitor. I logged into the bank's portal. The view-only access showed the balance. $40,012.45. It was there. It had to be there. But the knot in my stomach tightened. At exactly 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my parents standing in the hallway. My mother was clutching her purse like a shield, her eyes darting everywhere but my face. My father stood tall, his jaw set in a stubborn line, exuding the unearned arrogance of a man who believes he is perpetually in the right. They walked in, sat down on my sofa, and refused the water I offered. Let's get straight to it, my father said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on his knees. There is no easy way to say this, so I will just say it. The money isn't there. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The humming of the refrigerator suddenly sounded deafening. What do you mean the money isn't there? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I literally checked the portal this afternoon. The balance is $40,000. My mother finally looked at me, her eyes brimming with a sickening mixture of guilt and defiance. That's a cached view, sweetie. The bank hasn't updated the front-end interface for the sub-accounts. We withdrew the funds 3 weeks ago. I felt the blood drain from my face. You withdrew it, all of it, why, where is my money? My father sighed, the condescending sigh he used whenever he felt I was being overly emotional. Look, we need you to look at the bigger picture here. You know your brother has been struggling to get his new venture off the ground. Traditional venture capitalists are too risk-averse right now, and the banks wouldn't give him a loan because of that. Misunderstanding with his last business. The misunderstanding with his last business was a failed dropshipping company that had left him $70,000 in debt, which my parents had quietly paid off by taking out a second mortgage on their home. Julian, I breathed, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. You gave my wedding fund to Julian. We invested it, my father corrected sharply. We invested it in Julian's new cryptocurrency startup. It's a decentralized finance protocol. He's launching a new token. It's revolutionary. He's going to revolutionize the blockchain. He doesn't even know how to code. I screamed, finally losing my composure. I was a cybersecurity analyst. I breathed code. Julian thought blockchain was a brand of expensive luggage until 6 months ago. He's a 30-year-old finance bro who wears Patagonia vests and loses money on sports betting. What do you mean he's launching a token? Don't speak about your brother that way, my mother snapped, her maternal instinct flaring up to protect her golden child. He has hired a brilliant team of developers in Eastern Europe. He is the visionary. He is the CEO. The pre-sale is launching next week, and he needed liquidity to fund the initial liquidity pools on the decentralized exchanges. He came to us, he was desperate, and we knew that if we just gave him the seed money, he would make millions. But it wasn't your money to give, I shouted, tears of pure, blinding rage stinging my eyes. It was my money. I worked for it, I saved it for 10 years. The vendors need to be paid this week. What am I supposed to do? My father stood up, dusting off his trousers as if he had just completed a minor, mildly unpleasant chore. You are overreacting. Julian has promised to pay you back with 100% interest once the coin goes to the moon. That's the term they use in the industry, to the moon. In 6 months, you'll have $80,000. I don't need $80,000 in 6 months. I sobbed, clutching my head. I need $40,000 right now. The wedding is in 3 months. We will lose the venue. We will lose the caterer. Mark and I will lose the deposits we already put down. My mother stood beside my father, her face hardening into a mask of cold, unyielding entitlement. Well, perhaps a lavish wedding was a frivolous expense anyway. You and Mark are perfectly capable of going down to the courthouse. An elopement is very romantic. Family invests in family. Your brother needed us and we stepped up. We expect you to understand that family comes first. You stole from me, I said, my voice dropping to a dead, icy monotone. You are thieves. It was a custodial account under my name. My mother countered smoothly, completely devoid of empathy. Legally, the funds belonged to the primary account holder. We did nothing illegal. We did what was best for the family portfolio. When Julian is a billionaire, you will be thanking us. Now, we are leaving. You can call us when you've calmed down and are ready to apologize for your disrespect. They walked out of my apartment, shutting the door softly behind them. I stood in the middle of my living room for a long, long time. I didn't cry. The initial shock had burned away the tears, leaving behind a vast, hollow emptiness that was rapidly filling with something dark, cold, and razor-sharp. When Mark came home an hour later, he found me sitting on the floor in the dark, my laptop glowing in front of me. I told him everything. I watched the color drain from his face, watched the anger flare in his kind eyes. He held me, he cursed my parents, and he offered to sell his car, to take out a personal loan, to do whatever it took to save the wedding. No, I told him, my voice steady. We aren't taking out loans, we aren't going into debt because of them. Then what do? Mark asked gently, stroking my hair. Do we cancel it? I looked at the glowing screen of my laptop. I had already pulled up Julian's public social media profiles. He was posting videos from a rented mansion in Miami, holding a bottle of Dom Perignon, shouting about how Oracoin was going to disrupt the global financial system. No, I said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. We aren't canceling anything. I am going to get my money back, and Julian is going to pay for the entire wedding. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I brewed a pot of espresso, tied my hair back, and sat down at my custom-built desktop rig. If Julian was launching a cryptocurrency, it meant he was leaving a digital footprint. And if there is one thing a cybersecurity threat analyst knows how to do, it's how to follow footprints in the dark. I started with the basics. Open source intelligence, OSINT. I scraped every social media post, every forum mention, every Discord server associated with Oracoin. Julian, in his infinite arrogance, had registered the main domain name using a privacy proxy, but he had reused a specific Google Analytics tracking ID that linked back to an older, failed blog he had run in college. From there, I mapped out the server infrastructure. They were hosting the main site on cheap, offshore servers, but the real meat of the investigation was the blockchain itself. Cryptocurrencies operate on public ledgers. Every transaction, every smart contract deployment, is visible if you know how to read it. I found the contract address for Oracoin on the Ethereum network. I pulled the compiled bytecode and ran it through a decompiler. Julian's brilliant team of developers had simply copy-pasted the source code from a notoriously flawed meme coin from 2 years ago, changing nothing but the name and the ticker symbol. But as I combed through the lines of Solidity code, my eyes narrowed. There were hidden functions buried deep within the contract. I spent 12 hours dissecting the code. By midnight, I had the entire picture, and it was worse and more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. Oracoin wasn't just a bad investment. It was a masterfully orchestrated, highly illegal Ponzi scheme, complete with a built-in rug pull mechanism. Here is how Julian and his developers had set it up. The smart contract had a hidden mint function that allowed the contract owner, Julian, to create an infinite amount of new tokens out of thin air, bypassing the stated maximum supply. Furthermore, there was a blacklist function that allowed the owner to freeze the wallets of anyone who tried to sell their tokens. The strategy was textbook crypto fraud. Julian was using my $40,000, along with funds he had likely scammed from other investors, to artificially inflate the price of the coin on decentralized exchanges through a process called wash trading, buying and selling the coin back and forth to his own hidden wallets to create the illusion of massive trading volume and high demand. Unsuspecting retail investors, lured in by Julian's flashy social media marketing and fake influencer endorsements, would buy the coin, driving the price up further. But when they tried to sell and take profits, they would find their wallets blacklisted. They were trapped. Meanwhile, Julian would use the hidden mint function to generate millions of new tokens for himself and dump them on the market, draining all the real Ethereum out of the liquidity pool and cashing out, leaving the investors holding worthless digital bags. It was federal wire fraud. It was securities fraud. It was a violation of dozens of SEC regulations. And Julian, because he was genuinely an idiot masquerading as a genius, had left his fingerprints all over it. I traced the initial funding of the smart contract deployment. It came from a wallet that had been funded by a centralized exchange account. I used a series of packet-sniffing tools and dark web database leaks to cross-reference the wallet addresses with known IP logs from his Miami rental house. I found a careless Telegram chat log on a publicly accessible, misconfigured Amazon S3 bucket where Julian and his Russian developer discussed exactly when they were going to pull the rug and how they were going to launder the stolen Ethereum through Tornado Cash. He wasn't just stealing my wedding fund. He was about to steal millions from innocent people. For a brief, fleeting second, I thought about calling my parents. I thought about showing them the code, showing them the chat logs, and begging them to force Julian to return my money before he committed a federal crime. But then I remembered my mother's cold eyes. Family invests in family. You can go down to the courthouse. They didn't care about me. They only cared about the illusion of Julian's success. If I warned them, Julian would just hide his tracks better, launch the scam under a different name, and I would never see my money again. I didn't want an apology anymore. I wanted complete, systematic destruction. Over the next week, I worked relentlessly. I compiled a massive, encrypted, 300-page dossier. I included the decompiled smart contract highlighting the malicious code. I included the Telegram chat logs proving intent to defraud. I mapped out the entire web of wallets showing the wash trading and the flow of funds, directly linking the initial liquidity injection to the exact $40,000 my parents had withdrawn from my account. I included Julian's real-world identity, his current location in Miami, his tax records, and a detailed explanation of the mechanics of the Ponzi scheme. I didn't just send it to a generic tip line. As a senior threat analyst, I had professional contacts. I used an anonymous ProtonMail account, routing my connection through 7 different VPNs and a Tor node, to directly email the dossier to a specific lead investigator at the Securities and Exchange Commission's Cyber Enforcement Division, and CC'd a contact I knew at the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force. The subject line of the email was simple: imminent multi-million-dollar cryptocurrency, fraud evidence of wash trading, malicious smart contracts, and wire fraud by Julian, last name. But I wasn't finished. Getting Julian arrested would provide justice, but it wouldn't pay for my caterer. I needed capital, and I knew exactly how to get it. I had been monitoring the decentralized exchanges. Oracoin had launched its presale, and thanks to Julian's aggressive marketing and the fake wash trading, the price was skyrocketing. It had gone from fractions of a cent to over $2 a token. The market cap was artificially bloated to nearly $50 million. Retail investors were pouring their life savings into it, blinded by the hype. I knew the exact date and time Julian was planning to execute the rug pull. It was buried in the Telegram logs. Friday, midnight EST. He was going to dump his minted tokens, drain the liquidity pool, and disappear. But I also knew that the SEC and the FBI move incredibly fast when they are handed a perfectly wrapped, irrefutable package of evidence involving an active, ongoing wire fraud. On Thursday morning, I sat down with Mark. We had exactly $8,000 left in our combined personal checking accounts. It was our emergency fund, our rent money, our grocery money. I need to borrow all of it, I told him, looking him dead in the eye. Every cent. I am going to execute a high-leverage short position on Julian's coin. Shorting a cryptocurrency on a decentralized perpetual exchange is incredibly risky. Essentially, you are borrowing an asset, selling it at the current high price, and hoping the price crashes so you can buy it back cheaper, return the borrowed asset, and keep the difference. If the price goes up instead, you get liquidated and lose everything. Are you absolutely sure about this? Mark asked, his voice trembling slightly, though his eyes remained steadfast. I have handed the FBI the smoking gun, the bullets, and the video of him pulling the trigger, I said coldly. By tomorrow, Oracoin will be worth absolute zero. I am betting against my brother's freedom. Mark didn't hesitate. He transferred the funds. I moved the $8,000 onto a decentralized perpetual trading platform that allowed 50x leverage on altcoins. I opened a massive short position against Oracoin at $2.15 per token. I was leveraged to the absolute hilt. If the coin went up even a few cents, I would lose our last $8,000 and we would be evicted. I didn't sleep on Thursday night. I sat at my desk, staring at two monitors. One showed the live price chart of Oracoin. The other was a live feed of Julian's public crypto wallets on Etherscan. Friday morning dawned gray and overcast. At 9 a.m. EST, the chart was still climbing. $2.20, $2.25. My margin maintenance was dangerously close to liquidation. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Had the FBI ignored the tip? Was the SEC too slow? At 10:14 a.m. EST, the chart froze. A sudden, massive red candle appeared on the screen. It wasn't a normal market sell-off. It was a catastrophic, algorithmic plunge. I glanced at the Etherscan monitor. Julian's main wallet, the one holding the millions of dollars in drained Ethereum, had suddenly been tagged. A massive red banner appeared across the top of the Block Explorer page. This address has been sanctioned by the Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, and the funds have been frozen pursuant to a federal warrant. They got him. The centralized exchanges that provided the backend fiat off-ramps immediately froze his accounts. The news hit crypto Twitter like a nuclear bomb. Someone leaked the fact that the developer wallets of Oracoin had been seized by the feds. Panic set in. The retail investors realized they had been scammed. The smart contract restrictions broke down under the sheer volume of network panic. The price of Oracoin plummeted. It dropped from $2.30 to $1.00 in 3 minutes. From $1.00 to $0.10 in 10 minutes. From $0.10 to $0.01 by noon. It was a total, unprecedented wipeout. The liquidity pool was completely decimated, not by Julian pulling the rug, but by federal seizure and absolute market capitulation. I sat in my chair, my hands shaking violently as I clicked the button to close my short position. Because I had used 50x leverage and the asset had dropped essentially 100% in value, the math was astronomical. I didn't just double my money. I didn't just get my $40,000 back. The screen flashed green. Position closed. Realized PNL, $385,420.00. $385,000. I stared at the number until my vision blurred. I had financially eviscerated my brother, handed him to the federal government on a silver platter, and made nearly $400,000 doing it. I closed the laptop, walked into the bedroom where Mark was grading papers, and simply said, "We can upgrade the caterer." The fallout within my family was biblical. My phone started ringing at 2 p.m. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. She called again, and again. By the 20th missed call, I finally picked up, turning on the speakerphone so Mark could hear. "He's been arrested," she shrieked, her voice a hysterical, unintelligible wail. "Julian has been arrested. The FBI raided his house in Miami. They took his computers, they took his cars, they took everything. They're denying him bail. They're saying he's a flight risk. They're charging him with wire fraud and securities fraud." "Wow," I said, my voice completely flat, pouring myself a glass of water. "That sounds really stressful for you. Are you not listening to me?" My father yelled, having apparently grabbed the phone. "Your brother is in federal custody. They're saying he stole millions. It's a misunderstanding. It has to be a misunderstanding. We need money for a defense attorney. The lawyers are asking for a $200,000 retainer." "That sounds like a lot of money," I noted calmly. "We don't have it." My mother sobbed in the background. "They froze the accounts. The investment is gone. The $40,000 is gone. We mortgaged the house to help him with the initial marketing budget. We tapped into our 401k. If we can't pay the lawyers, he's going to rot in federal prison." The sheer magnitude of their stupidity washed over me. They hadn't just given him my $40,000. They had doubled down. They had bet their entire retirement, their home, their financial future on their golden child's Ponzi scheme. And now they were destitute. Well, I said, leaning against the kitchen counter, savoring every single syllable. Family invests in family, right? Maybe you guys can just elope to a smaller house when the bank forecloses on yours. Silence deadened the line. It was a profound, suffocating silence. What did you say? My father whispered, his voice trembling not with anger, but with a sudden, dawning terror. I investigated Oracoin on Tuesday night, I explained, my tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. I decompiled the smart contract. I found the hidden mint functions. I found his telegram logs detailing the rug pull. I compiled a 300-page dossier and handed it directly to the SEC Cyber Enforcement Division and the FBI. I am the reason his assets are frozen. I am the reason the FBI kicked his door down. I sent him to prison. My mother let out a sound that I can only describe as a dying animal's death rattle. You destroyed your own brother? My father gasped, the reality finally shattering his fragile ego. You destroyed our family. No, I corrected sharply, the ice in my voice cutting through his delusion. You destroyed the family when you stole my money. Julian destroyed himself by being a greedy, incompetent criminal. I just expedited the paperwork. Oh, and by the way, I shorted his coin on a decentralized exchange right before the raid. I made close to 400 grand. The wedding is back on. But you two are uninvited. If you come anywhere near the venue, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Goodbye. I hung up and blocked their numbers. I blocked them on social media. I blocked their emails. I excised them from my life like a malignant tumor. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of luxurious vindication. With a nearly $400,000 budget, the wedding evolved from an elegant garden party into a masterpiece. We upgraded Mark's suit to custom bespoke tailoring. I bought the designer dress I had originally lusted after, but deemed too expensive. We hired a 10-piece live orchestra. We flew in rare orchids. We paid for open bars with top-shelf liquor for all 150 guests. And most importantly, I hired a private, top-tier security firm. 2 massive men in dark suits, equipped with earpieces and guest lists, stood at the wrought iron gates of the botanical garden. I handed them laminated photographs of my parents and my brother, though Julian was currently sitting in a federal holding facility in Miami, awaiting a trial that carried a maximum sentence of 20 years. The wedding day was perfect. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves were a brilliant gold, and the glass conservatory glowed with thousands of fairy lights. When I walked down the aisle, unaccompanied, with my head held high, I didn't feel a single ounce of sadness that my parents weren't there to give me away. I didn't need to be given away. I had bought my own freedom. Later that evening, as the orchestra played and the champagne flowed, my security detail approached me discreetly. "Ma'am," the head of security whispered. "2 individuals matching the photographs you provided attempted to breach the front gate about 20 minutes ago. They were highly agitated, claimed they were the parents of the bride." I took a sip of my Dom Perignon, the bubbles tickling my nose. And what happened? We informed them they were not on the list. They attempted to force entry. We restrained them, contacted local law enforcement, and they were escorted off the premises under threat of arrest. I looked across the dance floor. Mark was laughing with his groomsmen, his tie undone, looking ridiculously handsome and perfectly happy. I looked at the incredible floral arrangements, the towering cake, the joy radiating from my friends and chosen family. "Excellent," I told the security guard, handing him a generous tip from a thick envelope in my purse. "Thank you." I later found out through the grapevine that my parents had been forced to sell their home to cover Julian's exorbitant legal fees, moving into a cramped, 1-bedroom apartment on the bad side of town. Julian's trial is set for next spring. Federal prosecutors have a 99% conviction rate, and given the mountain of digital evidence, much of which I personally annotated for them, his lawyer is desperately trying to negotiate a plea deal that keeps him under a decade behind bars. They wanted me to elope so they could fund a criminal empire. Instead, I funded the wedding of my dreams with the ashes of their hubris. They always said family invests in family. They just didn't realize I was shorting their stock.